Hello, we're going to do Rainbow Valley, chapter 28. If you are coming across me for the first time, my name is Bree Carlisle. I am an audiobook narrator that narrates under a different name for most of my stuff. I started this podcast in October of 2021 and have been going ever since. My podcast just crossed, as of filming this, 30,000 downloads, which I think is insane. I honestly just started it as a way to grow my help my fiction narrating, and more people listened than I thought would. So I keep going, but we are going to start. If you want to go sign up for the newsletter at biteatatimebooks.com, we're going to start voting on quotes from the different books that we've done to be on shirts. So that's all I got. All right, let's go. Chapter 28. Today we'll be continuing Rainbow Valley by Lucy Maud Montgomery. Chapter 28. A Fast Day. The Good Conduct Club had a special session. The Good Conduct Club had a special session the next morning before school. After various suggestions, it was decided that a fast day would be an appropriate punishment. "We won't eat a single thing for a whole day," said Jerry. "I'm kind of curious to see what fasting is like anyhow. This'll be a good chance to find out." "What day will we choose for it?" asked Una, who thought it would be quite an easy punishment, and rather wondered that Jerry and Faith had not devised something harder. "Let's pick Monday," said Faith. "We mostly have a pretty filling dinner on Sundays, and Monday meals never amount to much anyhow." "But that's just the point," exclaimed Jerry. "We mustn't take the easiest day to fast, but the hardest, and that's Sunday, because, as you say, we mostly have roast beef that day instead of cold ditto. It wouldn't be much punishment to fast from ditto. Let's take next Sunday. It'll be a good day for Father's going to exchange for the morning service with the Upper Lowbridge minister. Father will be away till evening. If Aunt Martha wonders what's got into us, we'll tell her right up that we're fasting for the good of our souls. And it is in the Bible, and she's not to interfere, and I guess she won't." Aunt Martha did not. She merely said in her fretful, mumbling way, "What foolishness are you young rips up to now?" and thought no more about it. Mr. Meredith had gone away early in the morning before anyone was up. He went without his breakfast, too. But that was, of course, of common occurrence. Half of the time he forgot it, and there was no one to remind him of it. Breakfast. Aunt Martha's breakfast was not a hard meal to miss. Even the hungry young rips did not feel it any great deprivation to abstain from the lumpy porridge and blue milk, which had aroused the scorn of Mary Vance. But it was different at dinner time. They were furiously hungry then, and the odor of roast beef which pervaded the manse, and which was wholly delightful in spite of the fact that the roast beef was badly underdone, was almost more than they could stand. In desperation, they rushed to the graveyard where they couldn't smell it. But Una could not keep her eyes from the dining-room window, through which the Upper Lowbridge minister could be seen placidly eating. "If I could only have just a weeny teeny piece," she sighed. "Now you stop that," commanded Jerry. "Of course it's hard, but that's the punishment of it. I could eat a graven image this very minute, but am I complaining? Let's think of something else. We've just got to rise above our stomachs." At supper time they did not feel the pangs of hunger. At supper time they did not feel the pangs of hunger which they had suffered earlier in the day. "I suppose we're getting used to it," said Faith. "I feel an awfully queer, all-gone sort of feeling, but I can't say I'm hungry." "My head is funny," said Una. "It goes round and round sometimes." But she went gamely to church with the others. If Mr. Meredith had not been so wholly wrapped up in and carried away with his subject, he might have noticed the pale little face and hollow eyes in the manse pew beneath. He might have noticed the pale little face and hollow eyes in the manse pew beneath, but he noticed nothing, and his sermon was something longer than usual. Then, just before he gave out the final hymn, Una Meredith tumbled off the seat of the manse pew and lay in a dead faint on the floor. Mrs. Elder Clow was the first to reach her. She caught the thin little body from the arms of white-faced, terrified Faith and carried it into the vestry. Mr. Meredith forgot the hymn and everything else and rushed madly after her. The congregation dismissed itself as best it could. "Oh, Mrs. Clow," gasped Faith. "Is Una dead? Have we killed her?" "What is the matter with my child?" demanded the pale father. I don't think Mrs. Clow has talked. I do not think Mrs. Clow has talked. That is not what I meant to do. Undo. Stop. What I was trying to do. Where'd it go? Here. Okay. "She has just fainted, I think," said Mrs. Clow. "Oh, here's the doctor, thank goodness." Gilbert did not find it a very easy thing to bring Una back to consciousness. He worked over her for a long time before her eyes opened. Then he carried her over to the manse, followed by Faith, sobbing hysterically in her relief. She's just hungry, you know. She didn't eat a thing today. None of us did. We were all fasting." "Fasting," said Mr. Meredith. "And fasting," said the doctor. "Yes, to punish ourselves for singing Polly Wolly in the graveyard," said Faith. "My child, I don't want you to punish yourselves for that," said Mr. Meredith in distress. "I gave you your little scolding, and you were all penitent, and I forgave you." "Yes, but we had to be punished," explained Faith. "It's our rule in our Good Conduct Club, you know. If we do anything wrong or anything that is likely to hurt Father and the congregation, we have to punish ourselves. We are bringing ourselves up, you know, because there's nobody to do it." Mr. Meredith groaned, but the doctor got up from Una's side with an air of relief. "Then this child simply fainted from lack of food, and all she needs is a good square meal," he said. "Mrs. Clow, will you be kind enough to see she gets it? And I think from Faith's story that they would all be the better for something to eat, or we shall have more faintings." "I suppose we shouldn't have made Una fast," said Faith remorsefully. "When I think of it, only Jerry and I should have been punished. We got up the concert, and we were the oldest. I sang Polly Wolly just the same as the rest of you," said Una's weak little voice. "So I had to be punished too." Mrs. Clow came with a glass of milk. Faith and Jerry and Carl sneaked off to the pantry, and John Meredith went into his study where he sat in the darkness for a long time, alone with his bitter thoughts. So his children were bringing themselves up because there was nobody to do it, struggling along amid their little perplexities without a hand to guide or a voice to counsel. Faith's innocently uttered phrase rankled in her father's mind like a barbed shaft. There was nobody to look after them, to comfort their little souls and care for their little bodies. How frail Una had looked, lying there on the vestry sofa in that long faint. How thin were her tiny hands. How pallid her little face. She looked as if she might slip away from him in a breath. Sweet little Una, of whom Cecilia had begged him to take such special care. Since his wife's death, he had not felt such an agony of dread as when he had hung over his little girl in his unconscious in her. Since his wife's death, he had not felt such an agony of dread as when he had hung over his little girl in her unconsciousness. He must do something. But what? Should he ask Elizabeth Kirk to marry him? She was a good woman. She would be kind to his children. He must bring himself to do it if it were not for his love for Rosemary West. But until he had crushed that out, he could not seek another woman in marriage. And he could not crush it out. He had tried, and he could not. Rosemary had been in church that evening, for the first time since her return from Kingsport. He had caught a glimpse of her face in the back of the crowded church, just as he had finished his sermon. His heart had given a fierce throb. He sat while the choir sang the collection piece, with his head bent and tingling pulses. He had not seen her since the evening upon which he had asked her to marry him. When he had risen to give out the hymn, his hands were trembling and his pale face was flushed. Then Una's fainting spell had banished everything from his mind for a time. Now, in the darkness and solitude of the study, it rushed back. Rosemary was the only woman in the world for him. It was of no use for him to think of marrying any other. He could not commit such a sacrilege even for his... mouth click. He could not commit such a sacrilege even for his children's sake. He must take up his burden alone. He must try to be a better, a more watchful father. He must tell his children not to be afraid to come to him with all their little problems. Then he lighted his lamp and took up a bulky new book which was setting the theological world by the ears. He would read just one chapter to compose his mind. 5 minutes later, he was lost to the world and the troubles of the world. Thank you for joining Bite at a Time Books today, while we read a bite of one of your favorite classics. Again, my name is Bree Carlisle, and I hope you come back tomorrow for the next bite of Rainbow Valley. So, funny story. Not funny, but anyways. I haven't been doing this long enough. Not a long time. Like, there are definitely podcasters that have been doing this way longer than I have, and much respect to those who came before. But I will occasionally comment on posts in Facebook groups for podcasters or narrators or whatever. And occasionally I will have, sometimes narrator-wise, I'll have an author reach out to me or another person thinking about being a narrator reach out to me. Podcast-wise, I'll get people that, the random person that has no idea what this podcast is will ask to be interviewed. And I'm like, you don't have any idea what my podcast is. I don't interview. But occasionally I'll have other people wanting to be podcasters that will ask for like tips, tricks, advice, what equipment they need, how they get started, blah, blah, blah. So I come across one and she's asking about, she wants to start a fiction podcast daily, it sounds like from her post, and she wants it aimed towards kids, which my daughter listens to. I think it's Granny McDuff, loves that one. But that one's like a weekly podcast, and I think at this point they just like replay episodes because like it all says, like, when you look at the list now, at least last time I looked at it, which has been a while, like replay or something like that. So she wants to start basically a children's story where she reads children. So like most of the comments were like, make sure that your books are public domain, which I always do for my podcast, but I am not geared. While the Anne books are relatively safe for children, I wouldn't recommend Frankenstein for children or Jane Eyre for children or The Three Musketeers for children. Like, I am just doing like classic books that I love. The Grimm stories, I did 5 of those, and those are kind of terrifying. So, she asked like what equipment she needed, whatever. So, she messaged me, and because I commented and I was like, I have a daily fiction podcast that it's not aimed toward children, but it is a daily fiction podcast. I've been going for almost a year and a half now. I feel like I've done well. I just surpassed 30,000 downloads. I feel like that's a lot for this type podcast is supposed to be really, really hard to promote and like get people to. So I feel like I've done really well. Anyways, so she asks that, and like, I hate to be discouraging. And I say the same thing to narrators. If you are driven, you have a passion for it, you have the money to be able to purchase decent equipment to where your stuff doesn't sound like garbage, which mine at the beginning did not sound great. I'm about to like re-edit all of those episodes to make them hopefully sound better. Not the narrating, just the quality of the audio. Anyways, but it's like, it's a very much, you are an independent contractor. So it all depends on how willing you are to continue with it, how passionate you are about it, which will help you with your willingness to continue it. I love books. I love books. I have a gigantic bookshelf full of books, a lot of them classics or rewritings of classics. And so it's like one of those things, it's like, here's like the basics of what you would need, like a computer, a software to record on, a microphone, a space to record in. Like that's like the basics, and then like a place to upload it, which there's free ones. There are free ones where you can upload it. I pay because it had wide distribution and I like the features, but it's only like $20 a month. So I'm not paying a lot. So yeah, so that is typically my advice for people. As far as narrating goes, there's a website called Narrator's Roadmap that has basically all the information you could need if you were going to try to go it on your own without a coach. So yeah, that is the advice I typically give. If you're going to get into narrating professionally, you do not have to buy a Shure SM7B like I have. There are a few. Actually, Shure has another one that's like $250. That's a USB mic that MV7. I actually purchased it. I was going to use it as my backup, but the sound quality, while good, was different enough from this guy that I couldn't use it as a backup. So I ended up buying a whole complete setup and giving the other one to my mom. So it was good mic, good quality, just not a good substitute for the one that I currently have. So anyways, that's all I've got. I'm going to record 2 more chapters for today, but thanks guys. Have a good day.